The day I got a letter from the HOA taped to my cabin door, I knew trouble had arrived. In bold red ink it said, "You have 72 hours to tear down your illegal cabin or face daily fines." I just stood there staring at it, my jaw tight. Illegal. That cabin had been standing for years before the HOA even existed. I built it with my own two hands, on land I legally owned. Yet here they were, acting like they had power over me. Word spread fast around the lake. Neighbors whispered that the HOA president was cracking down, and some even pitied me. But instead of panicking, I sat down at my desk, pulled out the original property deed, and started digging. What I found nearly made me laugh out loud. Not only did I own the land my cabin stood on, but I also owned the rental plots underneath 3 of their luxury homes. The very houses those HOA board members lived in weren't fully theirs. They leased part of their lots from me under old agreements. So while the HOA strutted around like they ruled the lake, they were actually my tenants, and tenants pay rent. The next day, the HOA president marched up to my cabin with 2 board members behind her, waving that notice in my face like it was a royal decree. "You've got 72 hours left," she sneered. "Tear this place down or we'll sue." I smiled calmly and handed her an envelope. She opened it, expecting compliance, but her face went pale. Inside wasn't an apology, but a rent increase notice, a legally binding one. Effective immediately, their rent was tripled. The silence that followed was priceless. Then came the shouting. "You can't do this," the president screamed, her voice cracking. "We're the HOA, we make the rules." I leaned against the porch rail and said, "No, you make rules for your little association, but your houses sit on my land, and I make the rules here." Panic rippled through them. They had 30 days to comply with the new rent terms or vacate. Suddenly, their threats about tearing down my cabin sounded laughable. They couldn't even afford to lose their own roofs. Word spread through the community like wildfire. Some neighbors started questioning why they were paying HOA dues at all when their leaders couldn't even handle their own rent. Others pulled out old agreements and realized the HOA had overstepped its legal reach. Within a week, I started receiving calls from homeowners who once ignored me, begging to negotiate directly for fair leases. The HOA board, meanwhile, held emergency meetings, scrambling to figure out how to pay their skyrocketing rent and keep their fragile empire together. But the damage was done. Their arrogance had exposed their weakness. By the time the 72 hours were up, my cabin was still standing tall, untouched, solid as ever. The HOA couldn't lift a finger against me, because now they were too busy trying to scrape together money just to stay in their own homes. Some even threatened to resign from the board. I sat on my porch that evening, sipping coffee, watching the sunset reflect off the lake. The cabin that they had tried to tear down stood proudly, while their own empire cracked from within, all because they tried to push me around. Here's the irony. If they had just left me alone, nothing would have changed. But by threatening me, they reminded me of the power I actually held. I wasn't just a homeowner, I was their landlord, and landlords don't get evicted by their tenants. So when the HOA came for my cabin, I didn't just defend it. I turned the tables, tripled their rent, and left them scrambling in the mess they created. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting, fighting, or suing. It's simply reminding people where the real power lies. And in this case, it was sitting quietly in my filing cabinet in the form of old deeds and lease agreements. Now my cabin stands stronger than ever, and every month when their rent checks arrive, I can't help but smile. They wanted me gone in 72 hours, but instead they bought me dinner for life.